welcome back also for the people online. This is the last session, and then we will have a few talks at the very end. So this is a session with the title Towards Strategic Agenda and Roadmap for Data Spaces, from research to market innovation to market value, not innovation. So this session is going to be moderated by our Vice President, Professor Edward Curry, and Ed is also Director of Insight Research Center for Data Analytics in Ireland. So welcome, and thank you for all the speakers here today. It's a pleasure to have you here. The floor is yours, and you have 90 minutes.
That's great. Thanks very much, Anna. Welcome back. I'm sure more people will be joining, so I will take my time at the start. So our beautiful speakers will have lots of time to share their insights with a fuller room. So today we're going to talk about strategic agendas and how we get from innovation to market value. This is a slide that Thomas has spent the last, I would say, 2 years working on. And it's a very interesting slide when you look at it. It kind of captures two key things from my point of view. One is the complexity of our ecosystem, all of the different stakeholders there, all of the different initiatives, some of them being technology-centric, some of them being domain-centric. The other thing it captures is kind of a very high-level technology stack there as well, basically everything from hardware right out to the services. The key thing here is that the challenge that we have in working in a complex ecosystem with lots and lots of stakeholders. Within BDVA, we've been doing that since 2014. And what we've often done is brought together the different stakeholders that we have around particular projects and particular initiatives that require us to be able to get coherence, to bring together a community, to try to solve problems, to tackle big issues. And our main raison d'etre at the start was very much about the big data PPP, bringing together that community. We've also worked on other initiatives such as AI, data, and robotics, Euro, HPC, and things like quantum, and then also now starting to look at data spaces and the Data Space Business Alliance. I think this diagram has probably been used the most over the last few days, but it's a very interesting one because the previous session was very much looking at convergence. It was looking at what happens in the next, well, from 2020, what's happening in the previous 18 months, the next 18 months, this starting conversation. And it's been very interesting this morning to kind of see where there are areas of convergence and there's other areas where there's maybe not so much convergence. That's very interesting. And I think there's a couple of really nice points made this morning about let's not try and do everything in this first version of data spaces. What's the minimal viable data space maybe as coming out of Gaia, and understanding, well, where do we have that convergence and what value can we get out of that now, but not trying to pause everything until we have to have full convergence and everything. So making them real and getting them in progress. When we look at the other parts of this diagram, what we see is, well, what happens after convergence? Well, standardization is an important aspect, and we had Rigo today talking about that and some of the initiatives there. But then deployment and experimentation becoming critical, because once you have that convergence, once you have the technologies, you then have stakeholders using it, users using that technology, understanding how it works, understanding where it doesn't work, understanding where it brings value, understanding where it's still falling short. And that's very much an experimentation phase that takes place over the deployment. But what's interesting here is this is a very linear kind of view of what's going to happen over the next, over this decade that's here from 2020 to 2030. But the reality is that's not actually how innovation happens. Innovation happens in waves. That's the way it works. And what we have here is a classic academic diagram. I'm the professor, so that's what I do, where we have a chart where you can see we've got the performance and the value of an offering, and then over time, what happens with it. So we can see here with this first curve here, we have the birth of a technology, its growth, its maturity, where people start to understand it, start to use it in different use cases and in prevalence. And then you have, in that mature kind of phase, people start asking questions about, well, where does it fall short? What are the problems it's not solving for me? Where are the challenges that this technology does not help me with? And what you have there is what they call discontinuity. This is an opportunity for new technologies to come in and to disrupt the marketplace, to be able to add new innovation. And typically what you find at that phase of maturity is that a new innovation happens, and then you get a breakthrough, and then you actually start generating more and more value from it. And you get these waves of innovation. And data spaces will be no different. So we're very much in that first wave of data spaces. Today, we've been listening to everyone talking about making data spaces happen. So we're definitely very close to data spaces 1.0, but the story won't stop there. Data spaces 1.0 will not solve all of the problems that we need. We will have new problems, and in fact, it'll probably create more problems than they may solve. Again, as a researcher, that's very positive for me. So what we need to start thinking about as well is, well, where do we go with this? What's the bigger picture that we may try to be achieving in 3 to 5 years' time as well? What's the agenda that we need for data spaces 2.0? The other thing that's interesting is that within each of these waves, the actual innovation happens in a life cycle. So you start off with an agenda, then you have ongoing research. That research produces technologies. Those technologies are deployed. You have impacts of those technologies. They're mature. You learn about them. You learn about their shortcomings. You learn about where there isn't convergence. You learn about where there's value opportunities for new work to be done. And that can create your agenda again. And this is basically that innovation life cycle. It happens in companies. It happens in communities. It happens with technologies. So the really important parts here is looking at that impacts. If you've got a mature technology, if you have that first version very close there, you can start to think about the next agenda that's important. And the other really important part here is the stakeholder involvement. That's the critical part, because the stakeholders understand those technologies and their limitations and what would make a productive and valuable agenda. So what we'd like to propose is that we believe there's a need for a strategic agenda for data spaces. The purpose of this document will be to kind of identify the common challenges and opportunities around research, innovation, deployment, and value. Critical things about good agendas in communities is that they're consensus-based, they're following an open process, they're typically technology agnostic, which means they can be applied in different domains and from people that use different technology stacks. And they also give us a clear understanding of the challenges and also the opportunities that exist within a community. Within BDVA, this is actually one of the raison d'etres for us as a community to exist, is to actually create these agendas and work together to be able to do that. Many of you are familiar with how we've done this in the Big Data Value PPP. I don't see Nuria in the room at the moment. She might be still having coffee, but she would remember this slide, which came from a project in 2012, where that project analyzed the needs of the stakeholders across different domains to understand what are the key enabling technologies that we needed for big data. Working with that project and also members from the NESI community and other partners as well, BDVA was created to actually implement that agenda. Within our association, any member will be very familiar with this slide. This is how we update our agenda, a very clear process, engaging internal members in our community, engaging external members, looking for that consensus, looking for that agreement on common challenges and common opportunities. So the process is key there as well. Fast forwarding on to another project, the European Partnership on AI Data and Robotics. Again, an opportunity was witnessed where we could bring together the communities to actually understand what are the challenges to actually have successful adoption of AI within Europe. A key thing about this particular initiative is that it wasn't just about BDVA. In fact, it started with BDVA and EU Robotics, and then it was also joined by a number of the AI communities such as Claire, Ellis, and Euro AI. So a much, much bigger, broader coalition coming together to work together. What did they do? Well, they created a consensus-based agenda from research stakeholders and industry stakeholders, and it was actually a very long process. It actually took us about 3 years to actually do that from start to finish, from the inception. So if you think of today as being day zero, it could be 2 to 3 years before what we're finished, before it's completed what we're talking about today. But it also talks about the journey that a community goes on to understand each other, to understand the common challenges, and to work together. And this process overall had about 500 contributions from different people across Europe. So very much inclusive, bringing people together with a very, very clear and open process for contributing. So with that, we're going to start our panel conversation. Here are my stakeholders. We've got people that represent communities. We've got people that represent industry. We have people that represent hubs. We have people that represent research and academia. So let's have a chat with them. Let's see what kind of challenges they see in going from research and innovation to the marketplace, getting their perspective of what's important. We're going to kick off first with Hierro, who is the CTO of Fiware and also the i4Trust project coordinator as well. Would you like to do the panel, or yeah, maybe that'd be nice. You can get some energy, some exercise.
All right, thank you. So, well, actually 2 slides. I was asked to prepare a bit what has been our experience going from research to market, and also how we see the other way around, the path from market to research. And well, and connected to, of course, the question of data spaces. So I decided to use this slide, and this slide, you have seen somehow this slide a couple of times along these days, which describe a bit the building blocks for creating data spaces. And I think Fiware is all about making things happen and transferring results from research to the market. We have done this with some of these building blocks that would be basic for the creation of data spaces. I want to elaborate a little bit about that. And also the efforts we are currently doing in trying to deliver some of the work on other building blocks also to the market and as soon as possible. And this is what we are fighting, among other things, within the context of the Data Space Business Alliance. If we think about data interoperability, we have been driven the adoption of a standard like NGS-ILD that is now becoming standard, widely adopted as de facto in cities, but also in other domains, even adopted beyond Europe. A couple of weeks ago, a company like AWS, Amazon Web Services, has announced they have adopted this as the smart territory framework. Can we give a better example about transferring from research to the market? Second aspect is smart data models, where we have launched an open community for agile definition of different models. This started like 2 years ago. Now we have more than 800 data models, which is something that is key for interoperability, as it was explained in the previous panel. And I want to give an example. Microsoft, which have launched the digital twin platform, they have some cases they have documented where they have decided to adopt the data models we have defined. Again, a good example how we are moving from research to the market and so on. Also collaboration with Alastria. Alastria is the organization that has deployed the blockchain network in Spain. And we have developed and already brought to the market some good examples how we can integrate this context broker technology with blockchain to secure the logging of transactions into the blockchain. We are collaborating with iShare in the context of a project called Life for Trust, and now having some real use case stories on the aspects about data sovereignty and trust. There are a lot of lessons that are now trying to bring in the scope of the Data Space Business Alliance, and also activities where we have developed components as a community in the data value creation pillar, companies like Hydra from engineering, that is already deployed in many customers and marketplace services. We started to pilot based on some real use cases. All these efforts is what we are now trying to push into the technology convergency discussions under the umbrella of the Data Space Business Alliance, with one only focus, trying to accelerate delivery to the market. I think we have a good record how to do this, and we expect that we are going to join forces in that regards. The way we intend to do this is by means of implementing and following an implementation-driven approach, trying to create what would be a minimum viable framework for creation of data spaces and be able to evolve this based on versions over time. And here is where also there is, I think, the opportunity about the path, the other path around, which is as soon as we deliver a first version of the solid framework and we start to deploy and test it with real use cases, I'm pretty sure there will be challenges, things that had not been properly covered, and therefore a good opportunity for research to be defined and in order to fill those gaps. but we need to really, instead of reinventing the wheel, try to leverage all those components that over time have become mature, try to integrate them in something that we can deliver soon. We intend to push everything to come with a first version of such minimal viable framework in September, and also with a second version within this year. And this could be a good basis that we could deliver for research projects to further develop their ideas in data spaces. I think that could be a good, yeah. So happy to participate in this discussion.
That's great, Juanjo. Thank you very much. Great to get the perspective of the Fiware community. So next we have Bert Verdonck, who is the program manager for health data spaces at Philips. But today he's actually representing the Gaia-X community, another community who've come together to tackle a common cause. Bert, please.
Yeah, maybe the first, a little controversial statement I will make is that Gaia-X is trying to not invent anything, not reinventing the wheel, but the standard starting point is to use existing standards, but bring them together to create a trusted framework, a trusted environment where participants can do what they want to do together. So in that sense, I think we're a little bit further on the stream, closer to the market, more in the market, trying to be a market enabler such that technology can find its way and can be adopted by broad communities. We never talk about data space singular, but we talk data spaces. There are many, there should be many. There are sectoral data spaces. Within a sector, there are different ecosystems that need their own rules that will set up or do in data spaces. But we want to do it in such a way that collaboration is possible, that we don't create new islands, but that between these data spaces, there is sufficient commonality to still connect, reach out, share across ecosystems. So we talk about ecosystem of ecosystems. And that is what we try to achieve, and where I think the Gaia-X initiative is complementary to many of the other initiatives at the table or in the room, in trying to create that next layer, that next level, creating that possibility of creating the very many promising initiatives that are already out there. So that's the first statement where I think it is very good that some of us try to focus a little bit more on market adoption, on playing the market fields, connecting and realizing that ecosystem of ecosystems. And maybe a bit of a challenge I want to bring in also in that space is, I think you had it on your introductory slides, how do we move from deployment to creating impact? And what I still feel is a little bit missing in many of our conversations is, how do we really scale up? How do we increase the impact of what we do? And we saw in the keynote this morning, for example, very inspiring examples in the smarter, healthier city. And each of those projects that were illustrated with some pictures inspires me. I said, oh, that's nice. I'd like to have that. But I'm pretty sure that several of those don't scale or do not lead to adoption or broader adoption. So why is that? So can we then learn from the initiatives that do not scale to figure out how do we make them bigger? And a starting point to improve that part, the adoption, creating impact, is to measure. Because what you don't measure, you cannot improve. And there we are very inspired by the IDSA radar that IDSA has set up to give more visibility of all these exciting initiatives. And I already discussed with Lars that we need to make the radar a little bit bigger, because the current latest step is launched. Well, that's cool if you're launched, then there are still a lot of challenges coming. So how can we measure a data space along its further journey? Maybe it's in the second wave. Yeah, but how do we measure progress in the second wave? What are the attributes that matter in order to drive these initiatives to create a larger societal impact, sustainable impact, economical impact, because that's where I think there's still a big opportunity to learn. And feeding that back to a research community, I mean, those are challenges that probably our research community can still really work on. Not the smartest, brightest new thing, but existing promising things, how do we make them really big and impactful? So that's some of the thoughts I'd like to bring in.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Bert. Very fascinating. I might actually give Lars the opportunity to respond since he's our next intervention. So Lars Nagel from IDSA. Lars, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Ed. Yeah, happy to respond. Thanks first for the great opportunity here, for the invitation. Great to see you all here. So we are obviously the data spaces family, right? And it feels good to be here. And obviously we are moving in the right direction towards data spaces 2.0. And this would be my message today. So listening to all the comments and questions before, so what is a data space? Is it really there? Do we need it? Well, sorry, we should not ask it here in this group. We should be confident that we are on the right way, but we should not forget what Hermann said. So we are ready to deliver today. So data spaces 1.0 can be built. And we know that we need to work on data spaces 2.0, 3.0, and so on. And we already have taken a lot of actions. So that is what Juanjo has presented. So the building blocks or the convergence activities from BDVA. So I think we know what we are going to do and what we have to do, but we have to deliver today. So we will learn a lot more about this. I will not talk about that today. So that was my initial statement. I was asked to give an insight from research to innovation and the way back. So, well, IDSA, we are, well, the starting point, because IDSA has been founded 7 years ago because industry came across that something like data sovereignty is not there. It is not defined, it is not available, you cannot buy it. And then they said, okay, let's do some research. Let's come up with an architectural setup, and let's set up a group of companies who make it happen. And that is essentially what we have been doing the last years. And let me show this picture here. So that is what we came across with. So we are talking about data spaces. So what is it? Well, this is a data space, yeah. So it holds true for any data space, be it a platform, a digital platform, be it Facebook, be it the mobility data space, a health data space in the smart city context. So this is a standard. This is technology agnostic. We have heard all about that. But well, why did we come up with this sketch of a data space? So, well, we are all talking about data economy. What is data economy? So what differentiates data economy from a not data economy? So we want to share data, enlarge the available set or pool of data sets, and share it in a trustworthy manner. So we need to ensure what is written there: secure data exchange, end-to-end, trusted parties, remote execution, usage control, and enforcement. So that calls for a lot of mechanisms on the technical aspect. That is what we were talking a lot about first. And I like the first presentation with the 4 levels of interoperability. Yeah, we're starting at the lowest level of technical interoperability, move to the semantic, and then up. And that is what we have to do. But we have to bring this in place. So this is the IDS connector and things like that. And that is why I put up this picture. You can digest it tonight in detail. So in order to really make a data space happen, so provision data in a broker instance, query data, publish data models, provide a semantic interoperability, linked data, remote execution of apps. Well, this is heavy stuff. Yeah, we need really good technology, software, and a lot of research. And that is what we have to bring in the components. So that can be done. You see it there. And then you can realize the data space. And then from research to innovation, referring to Hermann, we do have data spaces which are up and running and which are earning money. Yeah, so the mobility data space in Germany and the Catena-X, I think you know these initiatives. They are built exactly on this architecture, following it one by one. And well, you see that the pictures were resembling what I showed before. And so they took the functional blueprint, they built a business ecosystem, and then they started to come from a data space 1.0 to 1.3 or something like that. And this is the next thing, interconnected data spaces. So that is what we will see. And let us discuss that today. So how can we really move from this national initiatives, sectoral initiatives, to true data spaces framework? As Bert said, we need several data spaces which are nested, overlapping, combined, interconnected to really, well, make the data strategy a reality. And on this path, we will answer or have to answer a lot of research questions so that Ed will still have something to do in the future. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Lars, for the job security. I appreciate it. So we've heard from three large communities, and together with BDVA, those communities are the core of the Data Space Business Alliance with over 1,000 members collectively. And we've also seen significant investment in technologies that are there to make it real. And we've also seen the desire to make it happen as well. But now let's take a step back from those associations and let's start looking at the industry perspective. So we're going to invite up Lanfranco Marasso from who's the Smart City Program Director at Engineering. And Lanfranco is going to give us the industrial perspective on this.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Anna and Angelo, to give us this fantastic opportunity face to face. I'm in engineering, and in engineering, I'm working in a research lab. But one of my tasks is to try to push the results of innovation research into the market. And frankly speaking, this is a terrible job. Oops, where is my boss in the audience? I can do that. It's a terrible job because when you are talking with the researchers about our solution, we say, this is too simple to push into the market. We need to elaborate a little bit more our projects. But if you talk to the business guys, they say, oh, you are in the blue sky, we cannot apply into the market. So the title of this section is very challenging to me. And this is in a way reflecting my daily life. And I think we need to, can I switch on the next slide? Oh, is here. I only prepare one slide. This is a slide. I think this is a kind of matter of interoperability, the trade-off between research and innovation in the market. Interoperability means talking and listening. And this is the key point, because we need to listen as a research to the real needs on the market side in order to understand what is the value. And on the other side, from the market, I think they need to talk about the real needs and what we can do. So as a statement, as a first statement in this opening stage, I think we need to face several challenges, which are recalled in a previous speech during the morning. We have the Data Government Act, the Digital Market Act, the Digital Services Act, the Artificial Intelligence. And we need to take into account in order to pave in the roadmap for the data spaces. But the most important point, at least from my side, is to really open our mind and to change the way we can engage the market or the business side in order to provide real value. And I think all our communities here are represented by, of course, universities and of course, R&D department for the companies, But the business side is very important because they can realize their real value, which is in this room yesterday and this morning, to provide solution to increase the quality of our services. I give an example later on in the way we realize using exactly the solutions, the technologies, the approach from all the communities mentioned before, where we realize to create value, a real data space, but we'll talk later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lanfranco. So next we're going to get the voice from academia. And our next contributor is Franziska von Scherenberg from Fraunhofer. And Franziska is one of the rising stars in the area of data spaces. So Franziska, please.
So thank you very much, Ed, for the introduction. And thanks, Anna, very much for inviting me to share an impulse on the strategic agenda and roadmap of data spaces from my perspective as a researcher in the Fraunhofer Institute for Software and Systems Engineering. So as we have already heard today, by 2025, an estimated 40 billion smart devices will make our lives easier, our production processes more efficient, and that means that for every person on this planet, there will be 5 devices that connect to the internet, that generate, analyze, distribute, or use data themselves. So therefore, data are the resource of our future value creation, as we know, and data spaces act as the fundament for this value creation. So the EU Data Governance Act defines data spaces as a purpose, sector-specific or cross-sectoral interoperable framework of common standards and practices to share or jointly process data. According to estimates by the EU Commission, the European data economy will be worth more than 800 billion euros in 2025. So this means that much of our future economic systems will be based on software for processing data into digital services, and much of our future market value will happen due to the existence of data spaces. So I'm taking one step back from the data spaces, back to the incentives for organizations of data sharing that are needed for companies to make data spaces happen. So to make them happen, we need to understand the incentives of data sharing for organizations, and a project funded by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research about incentives and the economics of data sharing, IEDS, focus exactly on this, on the incentives of data sharing in organizations, and it tries to understand and explain why organizations are still reluctant to share their data, because they are still of a lot of components they struggle with. And one crucial factor to share data is, and therefore to establish data spaces, is to make organizations to become active actors in the data economy, and they need to be equipped to be in control of their data. And sovereignty, therefore, is one important approach, as already mentioned by Lars in the IDS, that data sovereignty can be translated into technology. So without control and empowerment over data, the innovative potential of sharing data remains unrevealed, and data spaces will not unfold its true value. But empowerment here means also finding the balance between the maximum positions of fostering data reuse and protecting the organization's interests. So the truth will definitely lie in the middle, and also to bring data spaces to life and to develop them further. What is really great is that also shows the study, is that organizations need clear legal guideline as foreseen and by the Data Governance Act, for example, and the Data Act, to create the binding framework for the data economy in the European single market. So for organization, a guiding legal framework plays an important role in overcoming the uncertainties whether or not to invest in data sharing and therefore in data spaces. Another point from innovation to market value in Europe must also be that Europe must be innovative in itself. And therefore the focus should continue to be on open source software. Because after all, open source code creates trust per se, and often more resources can be activated through open development processes, and then individual players are already willing to master. So yeah, I'm looking forward to going deeper into this discussion with the experts here. And thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks very much, Francesca. And I think really looking at incentives for people to share in data spaces, for organizations to share in data spaces, I think whoever cracks that's the hardest problem to do. So I think it's very interesting work. Next, we have the perspective of hubs. So we're going to have Juliusz Pukacki, who's the Deputy General Manager and Program Leads at My Data Global.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this session. Yes, I will be, I think that this affiliation is not right, but because I'm representing Poznań Supercomputing and Networking Center here. No problem, no problem. But you know me from yesterday's session also, so yeah, I'm the same person as yesterday. So, so yeah. So yeah, I don't have any twin. So I will be presenting the perspective of resource provider in the context of the future, because as far as I understand this session, we are talking about the future and how to make these data spaces successful in the future. So I think that resource providers like PSCN, which is one of the biggest Polish infrastructure providers, have a great role in this process. Okay, so I will not go into details about the PSCN, but because I mentioned about it yesterday also, but what we can do now to be prepared for the future is to invest into the infrastructure and to be a step ahead comparing to the needs of the communities, market, and requirements that we have from external, let's say, parties. That's why we have a big investment also in storage infrastructure. As you can see, we are building some kind of hierarchical structure of our storage, and we are going towards exabytes of storage capacity in our data centers. Of course, it's very closely connected into the computing power, which are available in the traditional HPC manner and in the cloud way. So we are really flexible to be able to support different scenarios that appears in a scientific world and also which are coming from the commercial companies. But the infrastructure is just the one pillar of our activities, because it's PSCN, it's not only about providing infrastructure and managing the infrastructure. We are very active in research and development projects. So we believe that providing infrastructure is just the first step, but based on the infrastructure, we need to provide some higher level functionalities, services which can be used by scientific communities and commercial companies, SMEs. That's why we have started with this supporting scenarios in EU hubs for data. And we have selected some of the services to be selected by the SMEs there. The other activities which are also important are our Polish national projects, which are together with developing the infrastructure, are trying to provide services in a specific for the specific communities. One of the biggest ones are one dedicated for the processing of biomedical images, which are coming from high resolution microscopes. This is something that we are developing now with collaboration with universities in Poland, Warsaw University in Poland. The second one is environment for building machine learning models for cardiovascular diseases and for cancer area. We have strong collaboration with the best Polish medical centers, which are dealing with these problems and have the access to the data, patients' data in a big amount of data. So we are very close to the communities which are generating the data, because this is always the problem of the resource providers. You are not the generator of the data, so you need to collaborate with others. You need to be very active in this area, in the area of collaboration, to provide the access to the data which are generated by some other third parties. Okay, I will not go into details of this EU hubs for data federation, because it was very nicely presented by Daniel yesterday and by me also. So I just would like at the end just notice one thing related to our role in these experiments. So what is interesting here, that the three scenarios that we were supporting were based on the satellite images. What's specific about this source of data? I think the keyword here is data as a product. This data is very well prepared. They are very well maintained by the data generator, let's say, and it's very easy, let's say, use it for the scenarios, for building some higher level functionalities, for building some business models based on this data, because I think these SMEs which took part in these experiments trust this data, trust the way they are prepared, and believe that using this data could process their business in a better way. Okay, thank you very much.
That's great, Juliusz. Thank you very much. And I think thinking of data as a product is probably a key tenet of any kind of data hub, fundamentally, to get people to and organizations to engage with it. So we're going to have a bit of a discussion, guys, okay? So we've talked about the challenge that we have. We're looking at innovation, research to innovation. We're going into the marketplace. We're trying to see what's happening. What are the lessons that we're learning? And what's that information that's coming back? What's the experiences that we have that are going to come back that can help us to think about, well, what's going to come next? How do we see that with the experiences that you've all had? I'm going to start off with Juanjo. Fiware has been well established at this stage. It's a massive amount of deployments, many success stories. Based on your experiences there, and maybe some of the examples you gave earlier on, what kind of lessons are you learning out there? What kind of challenges are you coming across, or what kind of lessons learned have you got from your experiences so far? The microphone.
Yes. Well, I think the one lesson is that a product is always a living story that is always evolving. You cannot, consider things are done and finished. This is a continuous evolution, and that is where you have to combine this question about research and what is already consolidated, and try to build on top of what is already consolidated and try to expand the roadmap based on using research. We tend to, in Europe, to a bit reinvent the wheel and when due to research trying to, develop absolutely everything new. And that is not necessarily, I think, the best option. You may try to consolidate things in a framework, make that framework evolve based on results of different projects, and then address new research based on what has been consolidated. This is what I expect, and is what the kind of lesson we can bring in an initiative like the Data Space Business Alliance, trying to create such framework that where we incorporate and consolidate and integrate with what is already done, and then be able to evolve and grow that thing based on use cases, based on research, and so on. But trying always to build on what has already been consolidated rather than reinvent. That's, I would say, the main message I would like.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Juanjo. I'm going to go to Bert next. Bert, you're involved in health data spaces. Tell us about them.
Yeah, the health domain is probably not the most easy one, to say it. Of course, we're dealing with very sensitive personal health data. That's already making things more complicated. But also it's a very fragmented landscape. It's not like in telecom where you have a couple of large providers in every country. In healthcare, we have thousands of providers in each European country alone. And it's very hard to aggregate and bring these stakeholders together. And then you have a whole industry behind it, pharmaceutical, medical device, very regulated. So it's a very complex multi-stakeholder landscape, insurers not to be forgotten. It's a very complicated landscape. But still, this domain needs data-centric working. So the need is extremely high, the complexity is extremely high. That's why it is so exciting to work in that health domain. I see it pop up in many people's presentations and application domains, so that's great. But also in health, coming back to my earlier preaching, impact is important. How do you scale beyond a pilot, beyond a single hospital or a single region, beyond the test bed? How do you really identify the most impactful working applications, and can you scale them up to the larger population? I think we're in that stage. Now, speaking from or reflecting from a Philips position, a large company, we have been trying to be very active in this data space, AI algorithms and so forth, but it has proven very difficult to turn those into commercial success just by the lack of scale. And large companies struggle with that, almost similarly to SMEs or startups struggling with that. We collectively have a problem still to apply data-driven innovation, data AI applications to the larger community. So I would be very interested to continue to reflect with this community as well. So what is it that holds us back? We've heard legal governance constraints, but I think there is more. There is still also user experience issues. We make things too complex for patients to adopt often, but also the economical underpinning. Why would people pay for that? Why would an insurer invest in that? So all of that is important in order to get new applications, promising applications from a pilot to a full production scale.
That's great, Lars. That's great, Bert. If I was to give you, if I was a genie and you rubbed a bottle and I popped out and gave you 3 wishes, what 3 wishes would you want to make your health data space successful? I'm not a genie, but you know.
Yeah, you need to be quick, right, with genies. Yeah, 3 things is harmonize the legal landscape. There's too much diversity, which makes it really complex, country by country, region by region, to comply. Of course, we want to comply, but not in 55 different ways across Europe, because that inhibits innovation and scale. So simpler, harmonized landscape. Second thing is, I would also say cross-sectoral sharing, because I see such cool things scaling up in smart cities that I say, that's interesting, why can't I use that with my medical devices? So more cross-sectoral learning. That's why we join these associations, and these associations are so important to think cross-sector and leverage that. Third wish, eternal life.
I believe that was the the trap in the film or the book. Fantastic. Next up, we're going to go to Lars. And Lars, you have a lot of experience working in the mobility data space at Catena-X. Do you want to share some thoughts that you have with that?
Yeah, happy to share them. Well, I'm constantly thinking of, okay, what to share. So I think I try to stick to three learnings. First, if you remember the architecture stack of Catena-X, then there's, I think, the 8-layer model. And this represents what we are talking about today. At the very bottom, it is called a Gaia-X compliant IDS system. So that is what we talked about. And then, so this is the standard. This is the data space thing which we are talking about. And then there's a consortium which obviously came across that, okay, if we do something together, there will be a lot of non-market discriminatory things, services, agreements, which we can work on together. So the next 6 layers. And then there are all the business applications where the big OEMs or the first, second, and N-tier supplier can differentiate them. But the insight that we can work together on these 6 layers, this will be the change. And that is the reason why data spaces make a lot of sense. So this is a learning from Catena-X. Second, when we talk about this bigger landscape, inter-data spaces, interoperability, data spaces 2.0. So very nice to have Catena-X with all the big automotive players from Germany, but okay, how will it move on? So they have the global supplier network, but there are a lot of regional, national, local automotive supplier networks. How do we connect them with Catena-X? We are currently, well, making some trials. So we have smart connected supplier network in the Netherlands, which is similar. We should connect it. We have the same in Japan. So therefore, I'm really happy that TNO and others have, well, made a proof that this works to connect a data space in the Netherlands with a data space in Germany, with one in Japan. And last week, ByData in Spain has been launched. So this will be the next one to be connected. And then we all together have to learn, okay, how does that work? And that leads us from this technical interoperability and semantic interoperability, which, well, obviously works, to the big question of governance, so what Mark has been presenting. Yeah, so there are a lot of questions unanswered. So, well, do the guys from Spain have to join a German association? Do they have to copy the association? Do we need an association at all? How does that work? And this is still open. And we have to answer that question here. So this upper layer. So then in mobility data space, we have the question of, okay, and the same with Catena, how to run this complex beast of a data space. So the operation companies. So who provides all the nice services, which I have shown, which others have shown? How does it work? What is the operational model? These were already 3. I wanted to put a 4th point here, which is the Data Act. We hear about, like, okay, how to, well, access data and usage control and SMEs getting access to IoT devices and all this. So, well, this is usage control. This is nice in all the law documents, but how to bring it into technology? We currently do not have the usage control enforcement networks, frameworks, whatever, software stacks to make it really happen. We have FIRST in place, we can do that. But if we talk about distributed services, for example, for a policy execution point, policy admission point, so okay, where is it in a federated ecosystem? And there, I think Gaia-X will help us a lot to bring all of this together with one framework. I stop here. Thanks.
That's great, Lars. Thank you. And this genie does give 4 wishes, if you ask. Next, we're going to go to Lanfranco, who's going to talk a little bit about the use of open source technologies in the area of biosurveillance for COVID. That sounds fascinating. Can you share your...
Thank you, Ed. Let me share with you an experience which is very interesting because this is covering all the aspects we are touching today in the SBA Alliance. The story started several years ago. I'm talking about 2017, when we ran a project, a European project, research project, to define a concept of a platform, an ecosystem platform, to get together data coming from different sources. Can be legacy, can be open data, can be IoT. And we developed this platform as a digital enabler, enabling digitally the processes in a number of different domains. And as a research project, we deliver a number of POCs, MVPs, pilots all around the world. Suddenly, in the year 2020, the COVID appeared on the stage. And this is important because in a very few days, we trade from the research project into reality, and we really apply this available technology on the field. So the situation was February 2020, a regional Italian government need to manage all the data in order to protect people, in order to face the emergency unknown at that period of time. And a very smart doctor decided to collect all the possible data in the ecosystem coming from private and public stakeholders, from a number of different technologies, a number of different standards. It was a mess in terms of data, but the idea, the concept was very clear. And we acted in a very simple way. We had a platform, and basically the job supposed to do by the platform is exactly to match together all the data. The platform was based on Fiware technologies, and this is the first stakeholder in this area. And in 10 days, we delivered the platform, available for thousands and thousands of medical doctors in the region. Why? Because the technology was open enough and standard enough to be able to discuss with all the closed ecosystems and the information system existing in the region. The second point was how to run the platform. And the platform was a cloud application. But it was interesting because the government has different cloud providers, public and private. Most of the application was operated on legacy system, on a mainframe or some other things. And the architecture of the solution was open to be ready to federate different cloud situations. And this is in a way, in the background, we can see Gaia-X. So we have Fiware and we have Gaia-X principles. But then there is the third dimension, which is important, the data. Because imagine collect all the data from the test on the population after a few weeks and months and now years, because the solution is still up and running, unfortunately. We collect millions and millions of data related to millions of persons living in there. So this is a matter of big data and BDVA, so the third actor in the ecosystem. And the last part of the story is that we manage this data harmonized within Fiware in the cloud application with algorithm able to find out the clusters of infection. If you have available so many data, you are able to put together all the data, and thanks to the medical doctor, so the expert on the field, we have been able to predict the way the infection was spreading on the territory. So we mix together all the four components, the technology of Fiware, the Gaia-X principles for federated cloud services, and the BDVA for big data, not just big, but I would say wide and spread data, which is not exactly big, but we are managing a lot of data. So just to make short the story, this example, I think is fitting with this section, because the starting point as being a research project, and in very few years, the research project has been adopted by the real business side, and every single stakeholders, public and private, managing data on health You can imagine the security issues, the privacy issues, all the things we mentioned in the previous section has been taken into account. But everyone contribute and share and succeed in using the solution provided with the principles behind the stakeholders we are discussing now. And the last point is the value. Another keywords in the title of this session is what is the value for the market? How can we increase the value with our research background and technology background to increase the quality? Well, in this specific case, the value of data really meant to save lives. And this is incredible because we are not talking just in data economy on the business side, but every single dot on the map, which is a person, can be green or red or can be black, meaning something happening to single person. And using data, we contributed with the technology we developed in this context to save thousands and thousands of lives. Thank you.
That's great. It's a fantastic example. I'm going to give you a follow-up question because that's a wonderful example of where public organizations engaged with data and got value out of it. In terms of, is there lessons there that could be generalized about how we get organizations to engage, to share, and to extract value from their data? Is there things that you notice that could be replicated in other scenarios?
Well, the most important part of this story, I think, was the barriers and the constraints related to the privacy. Everyone invokes the GDPR, saying we cannot touch this kind of data. We cannot say a patient is living there with a family, with some other people living in the same house. But we try to be fully compliant with the GDPR. And once we relax the situation in terms of the way we can use data, the effective application of this solution can be applied in a number of other situations, and we did in reality. But the most important part of the story and the lesson learned we had from this project is that if you use open and standard and flexible technology, you are ready to discuss with everyone, because we are not going to be intrusive into existing systems. And we are innovative enough thanks to our communities represented here. And we are able to provide it to delivery in a very short time to solve a real problem. This is the most important part of the lesson learned we have for this story.
That's great. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to Francesca, and you want to maybe talk a little bit about Sovity.de. I haven't heard of this initiative. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yes, thank you very much. So I just wanted to emphasize that the data ecosystem is bigger than we think, and that there are companies like small boats or SMEs, how you call them, that are developing, for example, Sovity, which is a data space operating company, and Fraunhofer is a spin-off. So not Sovity is a spin-off of Fraunhofer, and can be a concrete example on how to support innovative and SMEs in the data spaces context, and it can be seen as a data space tech provider in a way that facilitates data sovereignty based on all technical IDS components. So that is Sovity.
Okay, great. And what are the biggest challenges that they're facing?
So I was listening also to the other panelists, and what really came to my mind is that all these great ideas require talents and require human knowledge and the human power, so to say, and that is really where these companies, they need to acquire good talents also.
So skills are a critical part of it. Absolutely. Great. Thank you for that. And then we'll move over to Juliusz, who's going to talk a little bit about the EU hubs for data and maybe the experience in the open calls.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe I will start in an optimistic way. So these experiments were very fruitful. I think for us also, and I hope that for the SMEs that we were supporting, we have a very good collaboration, and we could learn from each other. There was some kind of the process which was taking part there. But the pessimistic aspect, so we are talking about the future, about the impact of the data on European economy. So to have this impact, this scenario is not enough. These are good success stories to encourage the others for more active work in this area, but we should have some effect of the mass to have this economical impact on the economy, this economical impact. And it's, of course, I am not the person who could answer the question how to do it. I can just have some suggestions what could help in this process. So as I mentioned in my presentation, to start to treat the data as a product, because companies and commercial world don't have always time to research, to play, to try, and they need to have some access to the data, which is well defined, which is maintained by some party, which can be treated as a product to produce some other added value, which could impact the economy some way, especially if we are talking about the development of the artificial intelligence, which is, I think, nowadays in the most important factors in a growing economies like China, like US. So we need to have this mass effect, let's say, in using the data for applying machine learning technologies, not only in the academic communities, but to have this impact also in the commercial world, and not only big companies, but also it should go from down, from the small SMEs, which could be more flexible, more agile in their solutions, and yeah. And one more last remark concerning our role in this processes. So as an infrastructure provider, we could help in this process, but as I mentioned, not only by providing the resources, but by building some higher level services that could influence the process of development of these technologies. For instance, it was mentioned yesterday about the email ops, which is kind of the paradigm, which is getting more and more popular, and it proves to be the way to develop AI-oriented businesses and to conduct the business models based on the AI technologies, which provides the mechanisms and the tools for versioning the data, versioning the features which are generated from data, versioning the code of the model generated, because we need to be aware that the life cycle of the software based on machine learning, on artificial intelligence, is a little different than the traditional one, and we should take it into consideration.
Okay, and just a question: like when we start looking now at this next wave of disruption that comes through, do you think we should be continuing to do these open calls for SMEs? Do you think they're, with your experience, do you think they're a useful implement or instrument?
Yes, definitely. I think this is the way. I think that we should somehow advertise the success stories a little more. This is important role, our role, all of us. I think everybody of us can have this role in this process of advertising to show the way of participating in this process for the others, and then we can think about the future and this effect, mass effect on the economy.
That's great. Thank you. Juanjo would like to make an interjection here.
Well, it's because something, a really very important lesson learned came to my mind, and I didn't want to close without sharing that one, which is we really need to find out who is going to make money out of it and how. Fiware has been there and it's now, I think, a successful story because of a simple reasons. There have been companies, first integrators, and in some cases also application providers that have found a way to make money out of it. And because of that, Fiware still exists. If there were no companies making money out of it, the whole Fiware story has ended some years ago. So when thinking about data spaces, we really have to reflect seriously who is going to make money out of it and how. Who are going to be the companies that are going to approach their customers saying, look, you have to go and join data spaces, and I'm going to be the one that I'm going to facilitate this. In my vision, this is going to be integrators, companies like engineering, like Atos. We need to make sure those are able to find a way to make business out of this whole thing about data spaces. And also application providers who may be thinking about, okay, this is going to facilitate how I can create a software as a service and really make money. We need to really reflect on these things.
If I can build a little bit on that, I agree with you, Juanjo, that's very important. It's not only always about the money. There can also be a cost-saving aspect for a government or a quality improvement step in healthcare and so forth. Underlying, there may still be a money case, but it is also a quality, sustainable impact case.
Let's call it necessary but not sufficient, but it's necessary condition.
Agree.
Did Lanfranco want to add anything to that?
Yes, just to focus on the way we can engage the public institutions or the companies in engaging with data spaces, which is one of the most important part of this story. I think we need to consider data spaces as a kind of ecosystem composed by a number of things. Of course, we have physical and virtual infrastructure, but we have also human capital, which is important to understand exactly the value of data. Like in the example I gave you before, where the medical doctor side was the real key player in the game. As engineers, we cannot do this kind of application. We need someone working on the field, with the booth on the field every day. And then processes, which is important, and when contracts, smart contracts. So starting from this, and if we combine all together these components of the data space, there are a few points which need to focus on in order to engage many institutions and companies to adopt the data space methodology. So the first is a kind of change of mindset. As I mentioned before, we need to be open, completely open. But in most of the cases, the people and companies and administration tend to protect, to protect the castle. So the data is mine and I cannot share with you. And the ability to share in order to grow is something we should foster, we should encourage in this approach. Also as the capacity of cooperate. This is a wonderful example where sometimes we compete, some others we cooperate all together in projects, but the business side is another story. And we need to find out the trade-off and the balance. And the other point is the partnership. The partnership, you know, all the representative here are a wonderful example of partnership, but when you dive into the market, the partnership is quite complicated because business, rules, and some other things. And the last point is we use technology we need to use technology to improve business as a neighbor. So we are falling in love with technologies and data in algorithm and AI, but the business side is important, and we need to give what Juanjo mentioned before, who is making money. I don't want to lower the level of the discussion. I mentioned the value of data is also saving lives, but the business side is important. This could be very important to be taken into account.
Great. Thank you, Lanfranco. I think Francesca wants to make.
Yes, maybe to add on this, we definitely also need a European common roadmap for data spaces, and maybe Lars, you would also like to say something, like to yeah, because for example, the data space support center that shall be implemented, I think, or started end of this year, is a very good approach for a common vision and a common, yeah, look on data spaces.
Absolutely. Lars, would you like to add a bit? And then I'll offer opportunities for questions to the audience as well. So put your thinking caps on.
Yeah, so, well, we definitely need this this roadmap. So we have to transfer all the great learnings to more domains. So I said before this event, I do not want to always present these industrial and automotive use cases. I want to show great things for the citizens. I want to present a smart city use case. I want to present a health use case. So that is what we definitely have to make happen, Lanfranco. So it's so great to have these examples there. Let's consider this as a, well, seed for true data space in these domains. And I know that in the smart city domain, there are things happening. Let's present them next time here. Back to BDVA, nice view graph, which has been shown several times today with this convergence thing. So let's really have a look at where are we today in this view graph. So perhaps we should make a publication on it, because we are already on the track of convergence. Obviously, we are sitting here, we are working on this harmonization, convergence of technologies, of governance models, and definitely the Data Spaces Support Center will help. So it's all about harmonization, convergence, making things happen. But then I think it starts with the implementation, and this is a continuous effort. So we really have to make the proof that it works. So whatever incentive mechanism is behind, either optimization or well, reimbursement or whatever. And then it starts like awareness creation. And I think that is what we now really have to focus on. So data spaces obviously are a good idea, although there may be biased persons, but let's tell all the good stories, all the success stories, and let's work on these incentive models. So wide success stories, however we want to call it. That is what we have to show, because I'm truly convinced that we need data spaces, and there's more than only optimization of business processes, more than only earning money. It is doing, well, doing good things for society. And this is a value in itself. And this can be achieved with data spaces. And that is what we have to all together to promote, because otherwise you cannot explain why we need data spaces.
It's a great contribution, Lars. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? I don't see any hands. Oh, Martin, if you want to.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the excellent addressing issues in data spaces. And yesterday we were talking about marketplaces, and I see a common denominator in here, which is data is a centric point, right? So in data spaces, we have data, and then when we aggregate the data, we have information, and then we have knowledge on top of that. And I see data spaces, data lakes is a subset. I see where data warehouse is a subset in manufacturing, for example. I see a data lake is a subset in automotive, right? And when we went to hospitals, when people need to have a cardiopathy is detected via data sets that has been stored for years and years of research in cancer, etc., is more like this kind of applications for more business oriented. Now, my question is very clear, like, are we not confusing here data spaces versus marketplaces? Because the way to commercialize, as Juanjo mentioned, is a marketplace. There's no other way. It's going to be private, public is a different question, but data spaces needs to be more coming from the pure data perspective, information perspective, and knowledge perspective. And maybe that will be the contribution towards the next agenda, right? Because we are looking for the next steps to enhance this research. And and being more commercial. If we just try to sell data as it is, there's no value in data, right? Information, yes. Knowledge, yes, especially in hospitals, especially in manufacturing, automotive. But that needs to be a process. I would like to know what are your thoughts towards this next wave or next steps? Because I duly support all your points because we're in the same community. But we need to go out and convince people that there is value on the data lake, on the data warehouse, on the different configurations of these data spaces. So data space is just the philosophical definition, but when we go into practical, into domains, to verticals, we have to be more specific and describe these different configurations or subsets.
Thank you. Anyone want to take that one? So maybe I think the question is oh, maybe Juanjo might go to it, but actually I think it's inspired by yours. Where's the money? Is the next evolution from data spaces to market spaces?
Well, when I was listening, first I was like, well, no, definitely you are wrong. So, and that was my statement before. So, well, marketplaces, this is only one mechanism how to use the philosophy, the paradigm of data spaces. So valorize data sets, however, right? Increasing the quality of the data set in itself and then sell it. Yeah, maybe, but we do have the data marketplaces already in place today. And then we would limit ourselves only like, okay, we want to sell data. That is not the point. And that is also the bias which I do see several times with some commercial players, which say, okay, well, we provide a data marketplace, join us, and then all is fine. The concept of data space. So, but then you had the second part of your remark. Then, so that is referring to my remark before. Data spaces is a paradigm which serves a lot of different needs. So we can optimize and increase business processes. We can, well, just do something good, so by sharing data. And then there are other players which offer services to citizens, to the community, to whatever, and make money with that. Not with a very data set in itself, but with something extra, so value-added services. And I think that will be the good thing. And if we, well, bring all of this together, I think we end up with archetypes of data spaces. So yes, there will be data platforms, there will be these central data marketplaces, there will completely federated peer-to-peer data sharing ecosystems. These all make sense. And the good idea behind all this convergence idea is, okay, let's use all of these data endpoints. Let's combine them and let's use them for whatever sake makes sense. And we have tremendous versatility of benefits at the end. And this is also when we read the Data Governance Act. So just to touch this point, the data intermediary can have a lot of different shapes, and this refers to the archetype. So let's think about that.
Yeah. Sure. Then, if I understood well, all these blocks and functionalities that you described in the architecture of the data space should include a marketplace as a main or as one of the elements. Sure, yeah. It's not complementary, it's not replacing, it's just part of the data space.
It's part of, but I think there is one important thing that needs to be taken into account when we talk about marketplaces in data spaces. That is not necessarily data marketplaces. There are marketplaces of data services, which is a little bit going beyond. Yeah. For instance, I may have an AI service. It's a processing app which receives data and outputs data. Those services are going to be the marketplaces of data spaces. So it's not, don't think about marketplaces in data spaces as places where you see data sets with a price. There will be also services as very important aspect. And actually one of the things I believe will help to boost development of data spaces is because organizations would be able to find out that thanks to data spaces, they can extend their architectures with services that come from third parties. Using data they can share in a trusted manner, because that way they will be able to obtain the results of certain processing they are not capable to perform internally with their systems and so on. And this is a way, I believe, there will be data spaces emerging as a next natural step in the integration of systems within an organization. Simply adding systems from third parties, they can find in a data space thanks to the marketplaces where such systems are going to be exposed.
Yeah, totally.
And
And
So
this
we'll
aligns with
take another-
Lars, because at
we'll
the
take
end
another
we have
question,
to
'cause-
provide this information as
Yeah.
a service or knowledge as a service, and
So,
not
so
data
we,
as a
we'll
service.
take another question at this point because we've only got 2 minutes left. There's 2 more questions I'd like to get in. Mark, shout it up there as well.
Okay,
So
very
just-
quick
just
question.
briefly, please.
Oh, very noisy. My quick question is, I recently read Albert Bourla's book about creating a vaccine in 9 months, where normally that would take 10 years. Do we need maybe dots on the horizon for data spaces? I was wondering. Something like 10% less CO2 thanks to data spaces, or 15% less cancer thanks to data space. Would that help to convince people? Is that maybe another perspective we should bring with us in this discussion?
Absolutely. Be a bit more ambitious and set out some bold targets and reason back from there might be a better approach than pilot up.
That's great. And our last question then from Mark.
Hi. The topic is strategic agenda and roadmap. So I'm going to propose something that I think we need to jam into our roadmap. A new thing, a project. The idea, and I've talked to Bert about this a bit, we've talked about data marketplace, we talked about data monetization, but I think the biggest use case in which we will use data ecosystems and data spaces is where a group of contributors contribute data, contribute services in a rather closed environment to solve a problem. I don't think we can do that in data spaces. I don't think we can do that in data ecosystems. We need to create that little bag into which these assets can be put, and somebody can say, I'm going to process your data and come up with a solution to save you money, to improve healthcare, to what have you. And there will be shared benefits. There might be money. There might not be money. It might be social benefits, but we capture the results in that, but we track it and we manage it as a project. So a metaphor for this would be Kickstarter. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Kickstarter. It's a web-based platform where people basically say, I'm going to build a better mousetrap. Anybody want to give me any money for that? You put in 10 euros, $10, 10 centimes, whatever you have in your pocket, and you get a piece of the better mousetrap action. If you put in a lot of money, you can get 20 better mousetraps. You put in a little bit money, you get listed on the, printed on the back of the mousetrap. Something like that. The point is it's not transactional, it's not necessarily monetized, but it's a way of generating value, returning value to people who are contributing. So I think collectively, Fiware, IDSA, Gaia-X, whatever it is, there needs to be a way of tracking this and making this possible. I can list 7 real data space examples where people have said, I've got all the data, but nobody seems to be interested in working with it. So there ought to be a way to fix that. I'm proposing that as a roadmap item for solving that problem. Comments?
Does anyone disagree?
To me, what you describe is still very much a data space. But indeed, the additional element you give it, it's a focused initiative with a clearly defined benefit for the participants. Absolutely.
So let's discuss about the object. What could be the case? I like it. When we have created Gaia-X, we discussed exactly about that. So what you say is an incentive, or not an incentive model, but well, it's an idea of tokenization. And so you get shareholder of what you are consuming. So well, why not do it for data spaces? And well, I know that yesterday also a lot of people discussed about simple. well, let's think about data spaces on European scale and let's get shareholder of that. So maybe there could be like a European data sovereignty fund or a data spaces fund. So then it would be a completely different incentive model for companies to become part of it. Well, let's discuss that during lunch, but I like this idea and we definitely need something Kickstarter-like.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lars. So I'm going to try to sum up all the contributions from our stakeholders. So it's important that we start looking at post-launch activities. What happens when this data space is out there? How do we scale it? How do we leverage the tools and the technologies that we already have to build these? How do we start looking at domain, organizational level interoperability? How do we do that in areas, complex areas like health? What's the harmonized legal landscape that we can put in place? What are the challenges that we have with that? What's the user experience of that harmonized legal landscape? Is it just going to be GDPR and click on cookies? What are the business models that we need? The cross-sectoral sharing of learnings, the clear governance models for multiple data spaces across multiple jurisdictions to work together. What's the wide-scale usage control frameworks that we need to put in place? What about the skills that we need in our people? What about Mark's Kickstarter idea? How do we put that in place with the European Investment Bank? What are the new types of values that we can create? Yes, we need the money, but yes, we need societal benefit. Yes, we need shared benefit. So I'd like to thank all our stakeholders because I do believe we have a very solid start for a common agenda within this area. And thank you for your time, your efforts, your insights, and make sure you help us work on this and make it real together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, everyone. It was a very difficult challenge, this panel and the topic, and you managed very well. There's still a lot to talk, but it has been a pleasure to have again on the stage BDVA, Fiware, IDSA, Gaia-X, and together with other colleagues, we have My Data, we had many others, and then with the UHAS for Data, also on the stage, and then with representatives like engineering, like Fraunhofer, like many of you, that actually is through our members, through you, that we are building these connections in between these communities. So we are here talking, but it's really you who are helping us. So thank you very much.